It's great to see you all again, and we're excited to bring today's workshop to you, which having started this whole business as a teacher of English, I have a special admiration for what our presenter will be giving to us today, because I think the whole idea of helping students with their English skills is so very important. So it's great to see you all, and we will look forward to today's presentation. I want to introduce, first of all, Dr. Jacob Francom, who's our Associate Executive Director, but we have a special introduction to make in addition today. Dr. Mike Poe, who you see up there at the top, at least he's at the top of my screen, and Dr. Mike Poe has just been accepted the position of Associate Director, who he will work directly with Dr. Jake and me and Dr. Magoob in the administration of Array Global. Dr. Mike brings a lot of experience to us, and we're so excited to have him. One of his major gifts that he has and will help us in presenting to schools is that he's a tremendous teacher and administrator trainer. He's done that at his university position for many years now. And Dr. Mike, welcome to Array Global, and you want to give us a few words of welcome.
I just want to say I'm very excited about joining Array Global. We've been working together and moving into this role of helping really train administrators, train teachers to be the best that they can be for their students, because that's truly the people that we're trying to work for, and that's the students in each of your classrooms. So it's a great opportunity and a great honor to be a part of Array Global.
Thank you, Dr. Mike, and it's great to have you here. And Dr. Jake, give us some greetings and some introductions, and then we'll get ready for Dr. Jennifer.
All right. Well, thanks, Dr. Ray. Thanks, Dr. Mike. It's great to be with everyone. People from all over the world. It's a great opportunity for us to get together and talk about ways that we can improve ourselves as educators. So I'm excited to hear what Dr. Jennifer is going to be talking about as far as writing, because that's such an important thing in all that we do. Speaking of writing and speaking of activities, we have some exciting things coming up, and we hope that you are following us on our Facebook page and you're getting your students involved in these great activities. The first one is Me and My Community Service Program. If your students from now until May 15th, if they do 20 hours of community service, they will get a recognition, a certificate, and be part of our awards program. And this is a great way for them to add to their resume as they try to apply onto colleges. But any student from kindergarten all the way up to grade 12 can be part of this. And we had a lot of people involved in it last year. It was a great success. And not just a success for students being involved, but a success in giving back to your communities, giving back to your schools, but most importantly, in developing the character of each one of your students, each one of your children that were part of this. And that's what our main focus and goal is to help change the world by doing these different things. Also, we have a writing contest. We have a great training today on writing. And with that, we have a writing contest. We started it almost about a month ago when we kicked off the school year. The writing contest, it's every year called Write Around the World. This year, it's about gratitude. Why is gratitude essential to happiness? And how can you develop an attitude of gratitude? Your students from kindergarten to grade 12 can participate. I understand kindergartners can't write very much like a 12th grader can, but have them do the best that they can. Have them draw pictures about what they're grateful for. Have them write out a few words as you help them to talk about what they're grateful for. And then for the upper grades, 3rd through 5th grade and junior high and high school, we ask that they do about a 500 word essay. And again, we're going to be flexible with that depending on the grade levels, all the way up to the high school grade should be doing 500-word essay on that. So click on that link that you can see on our Facebook page or on our website and learn more about the contest rules. The neat part about these contests is that we do have prizes, not just certificates, but we provide an awards ceremony, and we also provide cash prizes. And then also we're excited to offer next month's workshop on team building. Dr. Bob Sanchez, who's done workshops with us in the past, he's an outstanding presenter, has a lot of experience, not just in education, but in a lot of different areas. So This is not just for team building between teachers, but team buildings among students and how you can improve communication, trust, and collaboration. So we're excited about that. And as always, if you have any questions about the services that we provide, about our accreditation services, our certification, or your STEM and STEAM program, or any way that we can help and support your schools, please let us know. Thanks, Dr. Ray.
And so I'm excited to introduce to you Dr. Jennifer Hill. Dr. Hill is a university professor, and she is an English professor and works with student teachers and so forth as they do their student teaching. And obviously, she emphasizes all the work in writing and everything involved with English skills. She's a tremendous resource, and we're so thankful, Dr. Jennifer, to have you with us today. Could I just mention, please, that if you have any comments or questions, please put them in the chat room. Dr. Jake and I and Dr. Mike, we will monitor the chat room. And if there's something that we think will be an addition or a question that we can present to Dr. Jennifer, we will certainly do that. So Dr. Jennifer, the show is yours. And I want to tell you, so many of these faces I recognize, they're here every month. And especially, I just want to say, when I see the same people here all the time, it tells me we have people here who are very eager to improve, and we're thankful for that. So Dr. Jennifer Hill, congratulations on your success as an educator, and we're looking forward to what you have to say to us today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. It's so much fun for me to be here with you today. It's lunchtime where I am, and later in the evening, I know where many of you are, but it's a privilege for me to just be able to share with you some thoughts. I actually started my career in education 24 years ago as a 7th grade middle school English teacher, and then moved up to the high school level. And throughout my career, it's just been neat to see how writing has been interwoven within that journey. So obviously I taught writing to middle school and high schoolers, but then stepped into a career as a school counselor. And in that role specifically, I used writing with many of my students that were processing difficult, hard things that were going on in their lives. And really writing for them became an outlet and a means of healing. And so it was really a tremendous opportunity for me to see how writing worked in the lives of my students in so many different ways. And then from there, I moved into more leadership roles as an AP director at my school. And so I was working not only in English, but helping teachers in other content areas help their students be successful on AP exams specifically. And from that piece, then my family moved overseas. So you'll see in this picture, that is several years ago now. This specific picture is from about 10 years ago. We moved to South Korea, and I got to work as the director of college and career counseling at an international school. And there specifically, I was working with students, helping them write admission essays for colleges and helping their parents understand the college application process. And so writing took another shape and form specifically at that point in my career. And then I had the opportunity to move back to now teach at my alma mater. And in the education department, one of my areas of expertise is content literacy that we're going to talk a lot about today. Usually I teach in the mornings here on campus, and then in the afternoons I'm out with student teachers in all content areas at the secondary level, working with them to better their skills as educators, but then also to incorporate reading, writing, and speaking within the content area. So I was thrilled to have the opportunity to share with you. I thought, oh my goodness, we could talk for about 20 hours, and I promise it won't take that long today, but there are so many things to talk about that I just decided to share with you some of my favorites and some of the things that have been most helpful in working with pre-service teachers and teachers in the classroom in all content areas and all grade levels, thinking about how we help our students write and the different types of things that they write about. So specifically today, the objectives and kind of my big picture goals for our time together are to focus on 3 different things. The first of those things being the idea of disciplinary literacy, which is probably a new term to you. We haven't used it truthfully in our area that long, but we're going to dive into what that means and what that looks like as we're working with students. Then we're going to take some time to talk about mentor texts and how those mentor texts can help us in our work with students and to help them in bettering their writing skills as they have specific things to model and aspire to. And then finally, we're going to take some time to talk about 3 different types of writing: provisional, readable, and polished writing practices in our classrooms. And my hope today is to give you a lot of practical examples of what these things can look like as well. So with that, let's get started. I want to share with you the story of a day for a specific student. So this is Alejandra, and you can see her class schedule there. I want to share with you what happened to Alejandra. And one of the things that I didn't mention is throughout my career, I have worked with a lot of second language learners, mainly learning English. They're already pretty proficient in their first language. But Alejandra is a second language learner trying to learn English in a classroom. Let me tell you about what happened to her on this specific day. During period 1, Alejandra's music teacher is describing a musical scale. The teacher uses this definition for the term scale: a series of tones ascending or descending in pitch. And this sample sentence: she practices scales on the piano. Her teacher indicates that this is a term that Alejandra is expected to learn. So Alejandra leaves her music classroom feeling very good about the word scale that she has just learned and feeling like she understands how it should be used. But then she goes on to period 2 and enters her math classroom. During period 2, Alejandra's math teacher is describing the decimal scale as a system of numbering. The teacher explains that the decimal scale counts by tens, as in cents, dimes, and dollars. Her teacher indicates that this is a term that Alejandra is expected to learn. So if you can imagine, in the first 2 hours of her day at school, she has encountered the same word in 2 completely different contexts, and she's confused. But the day is not over yet. So Alejandra moves now into period 3, in which she takes geography. In geography, the teacher asks the students to draw a city map to scale. Specifically, the teacher wants the map's mileage scale to be 1 inch for every 100 miles, or maybe 100 meters in your situation and context. Her teacher indicates that this is a term that Alejandra is expected to learn. So she has now heard the same word, 3 different classes, 3 completely different contexts, and she is really confused.
And Dr. Jennifer, do you want to, sorry to interrupt, do you mind putting up your PowerPoint?
Oh, absolutely.
I forgot to put that up, and it looks so beautiful too. So I want everyone to be able to see that. And I will share a link for it so everyone can access it too. But it's always great as you're going through these things, especially with the Alejandra information that you have. I really, really like that. Yeah.
Can you see it? I am so sorry.
No. It's our fault. We should have let you know. Yeah.
This will really help.
Yep.
I apologize for that. Let me just click back through for just a second here so you can see. I was hoping originally to let you know what I look like. Obviously, most of you see my picture here, but this first slide that you didn't see was a little bit about my personal bio and education. And again, I apologize that you weren't able to see that. Then the next slide was our key objectives for today. And I talk you through those 3 things that we're planning to really focus on during our time together. Thank you so much, Dr. Jake, for letting me know. Yeah. I do appreciate that. Great. I apologize.
Yeah.
So here you see now on the slide, Alejandra's different class periods and the different uses of scale. So she has just gone from geography to her biology class specifically. In biology, the teacher is giving a mini lecture on the topic of fish. The teacher states, most jawed fish have a protected covering of scales. A scale is one of the thin, flat, hard plates forming the outer covering of many fish, snakes, and lizards. Her teacher indicates that scale is a term that she is expected to learn. So this poor student now is really confused and really struggling. And then to make matters worse, the last class period that she goes to is her health class. And in her health class, this is what happens. The health teacher, when speaking about growth and development, says a baby scale helps record the growth of infants. The health teacher fails to define the term scale in this instance, so one can only imagine what must be going through this poor student's mind, hearing and learning about fish scales, and then hearing that they, as in the scales, may also help to record the growth of infants. And so obviously this is an extreme example, but just goes back to the fact that in teaching, working with second language learners or students learning in their first language, vocabulary and the context in which that is applied becomes so very important for students to understand, as is the understanding that we use words differently from one context to another. And as we talk today about writing, I just like to start with that story, because so many times, and I've done this for 24 years now, we get so settled with what we're teaching that it's easy to forget that our students bring both background knowledge and perhaps some misunderstandings in context into our classroom. And so as we talk about writing today, I just like to begin with that story as a good reminder of some of the things that can make learning challenging for students. And we know that when students get confused and frustrated, they're likely to give up or start feeling like they're being unsuccessful. And so our goal today is to find lots of ways for students like Alejandra and others to be successful in our classroom specifically. So I want to share with you first the idea of disciplinary literacy, which is actually a term that is very new in education circles. It hasn't been used for very long. Content literacy was really the precursor. So the idea of content literacy, and when we talk about literacy, we're of course talking about reading, writing, and speaking. So how then do we help students develop literacy skills in all different content areas as they move throughout their day into different subjects specifically? The idea of disciplinary literacy has been coined by a few new books that have come out. So the information that I'm going to share with you on the next few slides primarily comes from a text from Laria Lent called "This is Disciplinary Literacy." But the idea of disciplinary literacy is to think about the fact that all of our subject areas use terminology differently and specifically for one reason or another. In the example that we looked at first, Alejandra's teachers were all using the term scale correctly, but they were using it differently based on their context. And that was really hard for the student to understand, because she was hearing the same word, scale, not too difficult to read or to say, but she was hearing it used in so many different ways that she was feeling quite confused. So the author of this text, Laria Lent, says this: the idea that reading, writing, thinking, and doing within each discipline is unique and leads to the understanding that every field of study creates, communicates, and evaluates knowledge differently. And I think for me in my teaching, especially over the last 4 years, as I've started to incorporate the idea of disciplinary literacy into my classrooms, I found it to be quite empowering for students to think about the ways that specific discipline areas, specific jobs like scientists, mathematicians, historians, look at the idea of literacy a little differently depending on their background and the work that they're doing. So let's look at some examples, and we're going to look at reading examples first specifically. The idea of disciplinary literacy says we read differently depending on our context and our jobs. So for example, what you see on this first slide is how scientists tend to read and how mathematicians tend to read. So as we look at this information specifically, scientists go into reading something with an objective stance. They look for answers to relevant questions. They look for database outcomes. They pay attention to details and numbers. They ask why more than what. That can become key. And they're looking and really questioning, looking for reasoning and conclusions specifically. And all of this research really came from surveying thousands of specific careers within areas that we focus on in education and coming up with some generalizations. Now, keep in mind that this isn't always true for every scientist, but just gives us an idea that when a scientist approaches a text, they look at it differently than, let's say, a mathematician. And my husband is a math teacher, and so we have this conversation quite a lot in my house because my students approach a novel much differently than his students approach a story problem in mathematics. Mathematicians, as they read, tend to use the information that they are reading as the piece of a puzzle specifically. They make meaning out of symbols and abstract ideas. They ask questions as they read. They look for what is missing, and they look for patterns and relationships in the same ways that scientists do, but a little different from a mathematical lens. And I have found that when I help students think about the different ways that they look at things, it actually becomes quite empowering to them as they encounter a new text. If we're reading it through the lens of a scientist, or as we get into some more examples here, if they're reading through the lens of, let's say, a historian specifically. So when a historian looks at a text, they're going to compare and contrast ideas. They're going to look at different accounts and documents. They're going to use visuals. They're going to interpret primary and secondary sources, as well as thinking sequentially to piece together timelines as they're looking at what that may be for the event that they're reading about, or what has led up to a current situation. And then they're determining the meaning of words within context, because of course, if a historian is looking at a primary source document, it's quite possible that over time, the meaning of that word has changed because of lots of different situations. And so we can't go in with a mind frame of our current, the current decade that we're in, and look at a piece from 100 years ago and think that all of those words might have the same meaning. So reading like a historian takes on a different set of skills. And then, of course, as an English teacher, it's important to talk about reading fiction and nonfiction. And we can throw poetry and lots of different things in here as well. But when I sit down to read a novel, I use a very different lens than when I sit down to read a newspaper or a biography, for example, because we're looking at different things. So readers of fiction and nonfiction then look for ways that characters, setting, and conflict influence the meaning of the text. They understand the use and effect of figurative language. Why in the world would the author have put this in this piece of the story? What difference does that make? And then they find underlying messages that can evolve as specific themes within the text. And I remember the first time I started thinking about how I look at text differently depending on the lens that I'm using, it opened a whole new world of pieces of my brain that I was asking to use for different things that I was reading. And of course, don't forget, our topic is writing today. I haven't forgotten that either, but it's important to start thinking about reading itself, because then that transfers directly into, well, if this is the way that a historian reads, then what is the way that a historian writes, or a scientist writes, or a mathematician writes? So let's look at some of those examples now. So when experts in these fields write, scientists rely on technical, precise vocabulary. Their observations are written in bullet points, lists, or phrases. Scientists very seldom, unless they're getting ready to publish a journal article, use lots of paragraphs and pages of things. Their writing looks different. Communication of ideas is clear and systematic. It always follows logical reasoning. Words may be minimal or used in conjunction with charts and data. In the same way, my mathematician friends, when they write things, when my husband is sitting down to write an exam, he creates pictures or visuals to help develop a concept for his students. He creates story problems, complete sometimes with characters and main ideas. If we're trying to determine how many pizzas a student needs if he's going to feed all of his friends. He also, and mathematicians also, write to explain their answers. So quite often on a math exam, they not only solve the problem, but they need to write then about the process. How did they arrive at the process of solving? And then of course in math, one of the goals is to prove answers correct. And we hope that they're able to do that. So that becomes a piece of then what mathematicians do when they write specifically. So what about our other discipline areas that we looked at previously? Historians. When historians write, they use events from multiple sources to synthesize and summarize what those are specifically. They respond to current events. They investigatively report on certain time periods or historical events. And they may also produce biographical reports specifically, whether that's from someone that has already died or someone that's currently living, as they're becoming a piece of living history and what that looks like. Compare that then to English language arts and what students write in English language arts. There they explore a variety of genres. They use mentor texts to study effective moves made by writers, and we're going to talk about mentor texts and what that means and how we might use those. They may use a workshop model for critiquing and refinement. We're going to talk in a little bit about the idea of a writer's circle and how students can get ideas from each other in their writing. But that input and feedback becomes a really important part of the process in language arts to really refine student writing. And then they look at text structures used specifically to convey meaning and perhaps connect to emotions specifically. And so all of these different things are going on. Even when students move from one class period to the next, we want them to start thinking about, how do we read differently? And if we read differently, then how in response are we going to write differently in different context areas? And I have found that the process of just connecting students in a history class to, we're going to read like a historian, we're going to write like a historian, becomes very powerful for them as they're thinking about, okay, so what does that mean? How do historians write? So what am I going to do when I'm putting this together? And it really challenges them to stretch their understanding of different texts, but then also stretch their own understanding of their writing and how they might approach different situations. So because we've already identified the fact that different discipline areas write differently, it's also important then to note the fact that our students are going to be writing lots of different things then over time. So I put together some examples for you specifically of the different types of things that students might be writing in our discipline areas. And as you read those, I'm going to encourage you, what have I left off? What other ideas do you have about the types of things that students could be writing? And if you would, please just jot those in the chat for me. Other things besides what's on this list, other ideas about the types of things that we might have students write across discipline areas. So I'm going to pause for just a minute, let you read what's on that slide, and then look at what others have entered in the chat as well.
Of course, we have to have Farouz be the first one up there. Way to go, Farouz. The learning logs. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he also said email, which
yeah, email. There it was. Yeah.
There's so much email.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And helping students understand what email looks like in a professional context may help them not only get a job, but keep a job, or maybe even hear back from a professor someday in college if they presented their questions clearly and accurately. So emails, of course, become such a daily part of our jobs. And it's important to help them understand how writing looks different when I'm composing an email to a grandparent or to an employer. That can look very different as well.
And of course, I have to throw in here the warning on Facebook, because what you write on Facebook, if you're looking for a job or something like that, these employers now are getting pretty savvy, pretty smart about finding your Facebook account. And if you've said some things on there, either really inappropriate things or maybe used poor grammar, poor writing and so forth, that will come home to haunt students. And so it's really important for students to understand that when they do this, they better be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
I like Mona's. She talks about advertisements and complaints. Yeah, that's very, very specific for the situation. Yeah, that's very good example.
Mm-hmm.
And comics. Yeah, Sharon writes comics. That's interesting.
My students, and truthfully, especially, well, all of my students, but especially my struggling learners, when they could summarize what they'd read by creating comic strips, it was powerful for them. And they came up with such great ideas too.
Dr. Mike writes scripts for commercials. What about if we wrote songs and get that involved too?
Definitely. So I hope what you're seeing is that in our different content areas, there are lots of different ways that we can expose students to different types of writing, but then we also want them to be doing their own writing in these different areas. Obviously, coming out of a structured organizational system, we need students to know how to write 5-paragraph essays and papers, and those continue to be important. We're not saying that at all, but there are also other things that will be helpful to them. And if they look using that disciplinary literacy lens, that can be very helpful to them as they're experimenting with these different types of writing and what it looks like. So thank you all for such great ideas. It was so fun to see the different things that you came up with. And hopefully as you're going through this is also helping you think about, oh, this might be a way that I might have students write. I want to give you some examples now as we move specifically into the idea of mentor text and what that looks like. So a mentor text might be another new term for you. Truthfully, this is about, well, it's probably only been about the last 2 years that I've been aware of the term mentor text. We've used writing examples forever in our teaching, but mentor text is actually a term that's coined now. And I like what it says, because if you think about the role of a mentor specifically, well, what does the mentor do? The mentor helps us, guides us, provides knowledge and resources. And so the mentor text, in exactly the same way, is going to provide concrete examples of the skills that we want students to master and guide them toward achieving it. So it's not enough just to say, I want you to write 3 paragraphs about. If we can provide them with examples, provide them with mentor texts about the ways that we want them to write, it strengthens their writing and it gives them a guide and really a plan to follow to help them become a better writer. So I want to share with you an example in a science classroom of how a teacher used a mentor text. Now you can use a text that's already available. We might look at a science report, for example, that's already online, or a journal, or a newspaper from 100 years ago, or whatever that looks like as a mentor text. But it's all about thinking of the ways that we want our students to write and then giving them examples of what that looks like. So in this science classroom, for example, this is actually an instructional coach that had worked with a teacher to incorporate a mentor text for a science lab report. And in this instance, the teacher actually wrote the lab report because she knew exactly what she wanted students to include. So she created her own to serve as a mentor text. Polly started the lesson by inviting the students to name the purpose of a lab report. One student said, "A lab report allows someone else to repeat the experiment." Polly elaborated on this by saying, "And so we want to write our lab reports in a way that will make it easy for someone else to follow the steps and repeat the experiment. So today I have prepared a mentor lab report to help guide your work as you write yours." She paused and reminded the students of how they use mentor texts in English classes to give them a vision for their work and to find and use strategies for improving their writing. Polly digitally shared the mentor lab report she had created and asked the students to read through the procedure section. So it's not enough to just say, "Here, students, I want you to read this example." Actually walking them through the different sections of the mentor text and telling them why each is important becomes really valuable to them. They needed to notice and make a note in their notebook of 3 to 4 strategies the writer of the experiment had used to make it easy for others to repeat that experiment. After about 10 minutes of independent study, Polly brought the class back together to share out the strategies that they had noticed. Students added to their list as others shared. She then sent them off to conduct their experiment and write up their procedure using the strategies they gathered from the mentor text to make it easy for someone else to repeat the experiment, as we know is very important in science. Once students were writing up their procedures, Polly was able to confer with groups, partners, and individuals efficiently with the help of a mentor lab guide. She kept coming back to the original question that she'd asked students previously. What strategies did this writer use to make it easy for someone to repeat this experiment? And how could you use those strategies in your own writing? Sometimes she even started off a conference with a group of students by asking, "What did you notice between what you wrote and what is written in a mentor text?" And so in this science example, the teacher created her own mentor text and then used it to help guide students to improve their own writing and to give them really a pattern to follow specifically as they were creating this lab write-up. And of course, scientists write differently than those in other content areas. So she was demonstrating that for them, both in what they were reading, and then they got the opportunity to understand, to demonstrate their own understanding in what they were writing with their own lab report specifically. So that's one instance of how a mentor text might be used in the classroom. And with my college students that are thinking about becoming teachers, I actually have them find some sample mentor texts that they think might be helpful, that they might be able to use in their own classrooms specifically to help teach writing. Sometimes using children's books are also a very powerful tool as mentor texts. And what I love about children's books, of course, they're very appropriate for specific grade levels at the elementary level, but high school students and middle school students can also benefit from reading a children's book in class as a mentor text specifically. So let me give you some examples of some of my favorites. Talking about using similes and metaphors in writing, My Mouth is a Volcano, written by Julia Cook, is an excellent example of not only writing, but of using similes and metaphors in writing. So if I'm working with my 7th graders on writing better similes and metaphors, I can take 5 minutes, read them this story. It's a lot of fun, first of all, so they really enjoy it. But then talk about how did the author use similes and metaphors specifically in this book, have them share a couple of examples, and then think about in their own writing how they might incorporate similes and metaphors. And so these different texts as children's books can help students across all grade levels think about the ways in which the author has written something and then how they might model it as well. Another example, one of my favorites, if you give a mouse a cookie, if you know this story, different things happen after you give the mouse a cookie, then the mouse wants a glass of milk to go with it. And then the story just continues and continues. So this book specifically is great for teaching cause and effect, but my husband's math students actually use this book as well for teaching proofs. If this happens, then this. If this, then that, and taking them through the steps specifically. So there are a lot of different ways that you can use a mentor text, even a children's book as a mentor text with older students, and of course with younger students too, because they love it. Circumference and the Dragon of Pi is all about unlocking the magic of pi, specifically the magic formula that helps mathematicians find the areas of circles. And so again, it's a children's book. It's not that long, but is very appropriate both at younger levels as students are just starting to understand circles, but also at older levels as students are doing many different things specifically with different shapes and calculations and formulas. So that's a fun one. And then of course, sometimes there are just texts that where the title tells us that all we need. The punctuation station is all about how we use punctuation throughout sentences and the different ways in which punctuation changes meaning. And so this can be a very important mentor text for children just learning about punctuation, but it's also a good reminder for older kids as well. This was one that I would pull out with my 9th graders sometimes when they needed some reminders. You will see at the bottom of this slide, I listed a website that is accessible to you. It's actually built upon an Amazon site. And so you will probably not be able to order the specific books through this site, but this author goes through and lists different mentor texts with something like, I think she has at least 30 different examples there: cause and effect, punctuation, similes and metaphors, storytelling, biography, and different ways to think about how we might use text in our classroom. So I just wanted to throw that there out for you as a specific example. So as we're talking about mentor texts, a quick question that I wanted to pose before we move on to our next subject is, how might you use a mentor text in your classroom? So if in the chat, you can just take a moment there to write. If you have a mentor text that you're currently using or think you might use, please enter that information. And if this has hopefully spurred some new ideas for you, would you just enter into the chat what you might, the ways in which you might use a mentor text. So we'll pause for just a moment there to look at some of your ideas.
While they're thinking, Dr. Jennifer, I was reminded not only of punctuation, but emphasis on a sentence. For instance, one of my old that I remember is the phrase, I did not say he stole the money. You could say, I did not say he stole the money. That means who did say it? And I said, how about I did not say he stole the money? Well, how did you communicate it? I did not say he stole the money. Well, how did he get it? And then the last one is, I did not say he stole the money. That's how, it's the same thing in writing. You can emphasize different ways by how you write things.
Mm-hmm. There's a children's book called Hug that only uses the word hug on every page, but it's about an elephant that gets lost from his mommy and is looking for his mom throughout all of these different pages. And he's saying the word hug, but in different ways. At one point, it's because he needs a hug himself. And at another point, it's because he sees two other animals hugging and wants that. And so there's so many different ways that we can teach those things to students. And sometimes the idea of these mentor texts can just be a really powerful example to them. So thank you so much for those different ideas. I hope that that helped you think about the examples that we give students. The last thing that I want to talk about today is specifically the different ways of writing. We've talked about the idea of disciplinary literacy, how to write like a scientist, how to write like a mathematician or a historian. But now I just want to talk with you a little bit about writing itself and some different ways that we might incorporate different types of writing into our different content areas on a daily basis. These examples come from a book called The Core 6, Essential Strategies for Achieving Excellence. And there's a chapter in this book called Write to Learn. And so this structure really comes from this text itself, but thinking about the different ways that we give students access to writing. So, oh, that was my slide that I was looking for. It just got out of order. All right, so when we're talking about provisional writing is the type of writing that students are doing all the time throughout different classes. Specifically, it's quick writes, it's brainstorming. It takes just a couple of minutes during class time for students to start getting their thoughts out on paper specifically. It's used to draw out prior knowledge, review and check understanding of content. When students are doing provisional writing, it's the ideas that are most important, not spelling. We don't want to get them hung up on the way to spell a word or if their grammar is correct. They're just getting their ideas out as much as they can. I had several, especially my struggling learners would say, I'm just stuck. I just don't know what to write. And so I would say, then write that you're stuck. Just say, I am stuck because, and then just keep writing. But the idea of provisional writing is that they just continuously are producing things that aren't for a grade, but it's helping them clarify the thoughts in their head and starting that really critical thinking process of getting those ideas out on paper. And so ideally, provisional writing is what we should be doing often, if not daily, in all of our different classes. And we already mentioned, I think it was Dr. Ray that mentioned the idea of learning logs. Learning logs are one of the ways in which students can do that across lots of different types of classes. But learning logs are used to clarify and develop ideas without students being worried about grades. So they're just getting their ideas out. They're just seeing what they think. They're not worried about polished writing yet. We'll get to that in just a little bit. It's important to have students share their responses with each other because that helps further develop their ideas. And then regularly, as a teacher, part of my role is to regularly comment and provide feedback. So it's not a grade in this type of writing, but it's feedback. So I'm reading what they're writing, or they're reading and writing with a peer. So I have an idea of their understanding and know if it's time to move on. It gives me the opportunity to clarify misconceptions. If I see several students that have written something that's not correct, maybe they've misunderstood something that I need to stop and clarify. But learning logs regularly incorporated within the curriculum become a really helpful way to do that. Here are some examples. You can ask questions to engage interests, like why do we need pests like insects? Activate prior knowledge, check for understanding, spur creative thinking, make connections, and reflect on learning. There are so many different ways that students can be writing. And truthfully, the more that they write, the less scary it is for them. So if we can just help them know that, hey, we're all going to write together. And it was powerful for my students to see me writing with them, because quite often they don't see adults in their lives write very often. And so I actually had in one of my classes a day where every Friday we would write about something and then we would share it. And I would share with them the different things that I was writing about as well. And they loved that. And it created such a community within our classroom when we were all sharing writing with each other. Another idea that I love when it comes to provisional writing is the idea of 4-2-1. And this comes specifically out of this Core 6 book. but this is how it works. Students generate 4 important ideas about what they have read or learned. So you just have them, we just talked about this, or we just read about this, write 4 ideas. Then, so that's where the 4 comes from. Then they meet in pairs to share ideas and agree on the 2 most important ideas. So we're moving from 4 to brainstorm into 2 ideas. Then from that step, they move to groups of 4. So they started individually, came up with ideas, worked with a partner, a little less inhibiting than it is if you were to work as a whole class. Then we're going to expand that a little bit into a group of 4 and have the students agree on the single most important idea. So it gives them an opportunity for discussion to clarify some things perhaps. Then all students free write about the big idea for about 3 to 5 minutes. So we clarified some things for them and then given them one more opportunity to write about these ideas after they've had opportunity for discussion. And then after that, students have incredible material to participate in a class discussion because they've both thought of their own ideas, shared them, refined them, and then they're really ready to discuss. Again, remember that the writing and provisional writing isn't the end all. It's just an opportunity to build as we move into other things within our coursework. So provisional writing happens every day, takes a little bit of time. We want to encourage students to be doing that in many different ways. Readable writing is the next step that we may continue from what we've done with provisional writing, but we don't have to. Sometimes provisional writing just ends when they finish a learning log. Readable writing is a little different though, because it's really meant for an audience. It's a way for students to develop and organize a structure and present it in such a way that it's easy for the reader to understand. These don't have to be graded, they could be, but if you grade readable writing, the idea is that we focus on accuracy and organization of main ideas and supporting details, as well as the quality of thinking. And so we're really encouraging students now to structure their writing in specific ways so it makes it easy for an audience to understand their key ideas and really requires them to take their thinking to the next level specifically. These are some examples of readable writing in different types of forms of writing: arguments, informative or an explanatory text, narrative text. All of these different types of writing would have a different question or a different prompt that students are answering, but it's requiring them to use different types of writing skills in order to answer the questions. Here's some more examples of comparison writing, of analysis, whether it's textual or whether it's mathematical, depending on what it is they're writing specifically. But the power of the prompt is that we are asking them then to really clarify their ideas in a way that works for our intended goal or objective. There are a couple of different tools that the text provides that I wanted to share with you because I think they're really helpful for students in really thinking about how am I breaking down my writing into an organized and sequence event or pattern or presentation. And one of those is a 3x3 writing frame. And the 3 across the top is the beginning, the middle, and the end. So we're really thinking about how they structure their writing specifically, and then asking them specific questions to help them determine things like make your case or restate the question. What are the magic 3s? What's my reason? What are my causes? What are my purposes? And when I make students really write this out, it adds so much structure to their writing because they have to clarify it. They don't just sit down and keep writing like they do in provisional. Readable, it's very organized and concise and structured, and helping them put that together in this way can really help strengthen their writing. So this is an elementary example. The next is an example of a personal narrative from middle school. It's set up the same way, that beginning, middle, end. And then I'm going to move down and actually have them fill in the boxes for key ideas, 3 key points in the story. What's the ending that clarifies your message and gets noticed specifically? And so these type of graphic organizers can help students organize their thoughts. And then from there, there's so much more that they can do with it specifically. We talked about provisional writing, readable writing, and the final then is polished writing, which much of the writing that happens in classrooms, students might not ever get to. The actual polished writing phase. But occasionally we want them to go all the way through the process so they have some really nice examples of what they're able to do from beginning to end. So in the full writing process, students are producing several drafts. They're coming up with a final draft there specifically. And then they also have the opportunity to reflect on the work that they've done. I want to show you just briefly a way that you can make writing folders using construction paper. So this is just a 12 by 18 sheet of construction paper. And I can fold the first sheet just in half and fold the next sheet lengthwise and then in half again. And then with a little tape, I'm able to create a folder that has 4 pockets. And so the first pocket can be their initial ideas, their brainstorm. The second pocket can be their first draft, second draft, and then final draft in its fully polished form. But this is kind of a fun way just to be able to display the different steps of writing and help students get ready for a parent-teacher conference or something like that specifically. So if you don't have access to lots of different folders, it's also quite nice just to be able to make your own. And then the last step to think about when you're thinking about polished writing is giving opportunities to give each other feedback. So whether that be a writing club or some other way that they have the opportunity to get not only my feedback as a teacher, but each other's feedback as well. And so this text, and it'll be on the next slide, gives lots of different examples of the types of things that they can discuss in their writing circles as they're working to refine their polished writing. So that was really, as our time was getting short, a quicker overview of those last steps, but I hope that it's given you an opportunity to think about the different types of writing and how we might incorporate them into our content areas specifically. We talked today about the skills of disciplinary literacy, about ways to use mentor texts throughout your curriculum, and then some ideas about provisional, readable, and polished writing as well. So as I told you before, these are some of my favorite things to talk about, and I could talk about them for a very long time. But I hope that you, through this hour that we've spent together today, have gotten an idea and hopefully a little bit of encouragement about some ways that you might incorporate writing throughout your curriculum, no matter what grade you're teaching or what subject you're teaching as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jennifer. And I must tell everyone that Dr. Jennifer told us in advance that she has a commitment that she needs to leave for. So we'll try to hold down and answer any questions, Dr. Jennifer. And if we really get lost and do you a disservice, forgive us. But hopefully we have some. I just want to thank you, Dr. Jennifer. I just want to emphasize something that she said that I hope you understand. Writing is not just something you do in English class. It's just like speaking. You know, if English is our language, we speak English in every class. Well, writing is how we communicate language, and we have to write in every class. And just a couple of suggestions for you, and Dr. Jennifer has said these really well when she talked about provisional writing, readable and polished. You know, I encourage all of you to, in every class, every subject, have writing as a part of that class every day. One way you can do this is, whether it's math or science or English or social studies, is at the beginning of every class, every day, have 3 to 5 minutes set aside for writing. And they can be writing about the subject matter. You could even give them a subject matter. And don't, at this point, as Dr. Jennifer said, you're not going to necessarily grade them at this time. It's just getting these juices flowing. And then help them to make it personal, make it very personal. When she said that in her class, she also wrote when she was having the students, you should be writing too as teachers, and then share these. And finally, help your students feel like they're the authors. Have these ready for posting on the bulletin board. Have those ready for parent-student, parent-to-teacher conferences where they come in and you can actually show your parents, or the teacher can show your parents what you've done. So I just encourage you all to write every day, or at least every other day in every class, because that's how we largely communicate, as well as speaking. And so I encourage you to consider that. Dr. Jake, you probably have some things.
Yeah, I just want to follow up after the Dr. Ray's words of wisdom. I will post in the chat in both Facebook and Zoom the survey that everyone needs to do and fill out. Again, it will be posted after Dr. Ray's words of wisdom because we don't want to miss that. So make sure that you fill that out, and then the certificates will be sent out later this week. If you do not receive a certificate by Friday, please contact us and let us know. As you're filling out the survey, please make sure that you get your name correct and also that you have your email correct. If you do not get an email immediately after you fill out the survey with some information saying that we've received it, please let us know or try it again, because you will receive an email right after that. So again, the survey is not going to get posted until after Dr. Ray's words of wisdom. So Dr. Ray, it's back to you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for this time that we've spent together today. And I know it was helpful for me, and I've been around a long time. So I hope it was helpful. I just want to conclude with one statement, because I believe this strongly. It's been a statement that has been a plaque on my wall since I first started in the education. And it is this: may the work we do make the world we live in a little more worthy of our children. May the work we do make the world we live in a little more worthy of our children, because that's why we're doing what we're doing, for our children. May we find that we are worthy for them, for the children. So bless you all. We'll take some time for some questions. Dr. Jennifer, as I said, probably will not be able to stay, but Dr. Jake, Dr. Mike, and I will try to answer any question. Marwa has her hand
and I just want to say thank you. I sure enjoyed being with you today, and I'm sorry that I'm not able to stay longer, but the best of luck to you and all the work that you do in your classrooms. We sure appreciate you and are thankful for you as well. So have a great rest of your weekend.
Great. Marwa, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question? Marwa, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, Maureen, let's have you. You had your hand up a while ago, and can you unmute yourself and ask your question? Okay. How's Maureen? Okay.
Okay, Doctor, I'm here. This is Marwa here, okay?
Okay, Marwa, I do hear you. Fine. We'll go to you first.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. I have a comment and a question as usual. The first comment is about your, every now and then, you know, you cite this, this phrase, my husband and students. So I really appreciate your love and respect for your husband and students. It seems that they are your whole life, you know? So when someone is my whole life, I keep mentioning him all the time. So I really appreciate this, and I want to focus and stress this. Thank you. The question is a little bit imaginary. Can I imagine someone who tries to provide the writing text and uses different modes and different kinds of writing styles that you have been telling us from the very beginning of this wonderful session? So, for example, if I'm providing a kind of article or whatever, and I may include, for example, a verse from a poem to get my audience to be emotional about the idea I'm providing, for example, then I may use some text, a sentence that is a little bit scientific in the style or register. So what should you call this outcome at the very end of providing this articular kind of text? Is there an ability or likelihood to do something like this? Thank you.
If I understand your question correctly, Marwa, you're talking about different moods for students and in their writing and so forth, if I understand your question correctly. I think one of the mistakes we make as teachers is we only have one idea about how something should be presented. And if we give students the ability to expand beyond what we are, the real goal here is good writing. That's the real goal. Whether the mood is one thing or another, I think is really secondary to the real goal. So that would be my response to your question. I don't know, Dr. Jake, Dr. Mike. Oh, Dr. Mike had to leave also, but I don't know if you had anything to add to that. But that'd be my thing is let them do it. For instance, I will give you an example, my own example. When I was a high school student, which is at least 10 years ago, I loved to write poetry. And so when I was given an assignment, I like to put it in poetry form. And that would just be something that I like to do. And the teacher was very accepting of that. Dr. Jake, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I just echo what you said, Dr. Ray. Just try to be as creative as you can as possible to get students engaged. Don't be stuck in just the same traditional type activities. So make sure that you go in and just get as creative as possible.
Yeah, and when Dr. Jennifer was talking about provisional writing, it's kind of what I said first when we asked students to write every day. Don't feel you have to grade that writing right away. Oh, sorry, this word is spelled this way. No, you used the wrong verb. You know, just let them write. This will all come later. So, Maureen, can we listen to your question? And,
I think she's tried to unmute herself, so we're going to go on to Ferouz.
Ferouz.
Good evening from my part. Thank you very much for an amazing workshop as usual. That was a great job. My question is, as you know, there are different kind of students in every class, specifically tactile, those who love learning by touching, and kinesthetic, those who would like to learn by moving around. And I had a kind of a challenge of teaching the writing class to those two types of students who took writing more of a passive activity because they didn't really enjoy of what they were supposed to do by nature. One wants to move around and the other wants to touch. So how would you cope with that kind of students? Thank you.
Well, I can give my answer and then we'll get Dr. Jake
Sure.
to his answer. I think what we do, Ferouz, is we take them where they are. For instance, the type of student who wants to touch. How about asking to say, write down how you feel when you touch something. What goes through your mind? How does your body feel when you touch something? Have them write that down. So they're talking about their touching. And obviously you're referring to Gardner's intelligences, but you know, there might be the musical student who does answer, you know, does respond a lot in music form. And so what kinds of feelings do you have when you're singing, when you're playing an instrument and so forth? So I think we take what they have and then we are able to have them think about, write down a word that comes to your mind that when you touch something, how does that feel? So that gets them started because it's not denying their intelligences. It is making it related to what you're trying to do. The important thing is to help them understand where they're coming from and to be able to put that on paper.
I like that, Dr. Ray. I'd also encourage you to figure out ways that you can get them interested. Once a student is interested in that topic, if they're a tactile learner, hands-on learner, and they like to be in the shop and things like that, maybe have a topic that's really focused on those different areas that they're so interested in. I like that.
And it comes to my mind too, did you remember that last month in our workshop, the presenter who was doing a presentation and the student had had answered 2 questions correct out of 20. Rather than saying minus 18, she said plus 2. You're on the, and see, that's what it is with writing too. We get so, and I know because I started the business as an English teacher. And we get so involved with, oh, use the right grammar, spell the words correctly. That's all going to come in time if we can just get them started. And I think I've told you this before, but one of my interests in writing came when I was a junior in high school, and writing to me was just stupid, and I didn't have to do it, didn't want to do it. And I handed in this assignment to my teacher. I'll never forget her name. It was Mrs. Johnson. And I handed in an assignment to her, and she wrote me back and she said, Ray, you have a real gift for writing. And I thought, wow. So it's really finding something positive to say. Or the touch student, you really understand to express a feeling when you touch something. Congratulations, I get it. So it's positive responses to these anything student. You might be every word spelled correctly except one. Say, hey, congratulations, Farouz, you spelled this word correctly. And that helps.
Dr. Ray, I've never heard that story before. That's a wonderful story. I think it just shows how powerful we are as educators and the positive things that we can say. We need to find the little things and praise, praise, praise.
Yeah.
And it could change a life, just like it did with Dr. Ray. For me, writing, the first few minutes, I always have a hard time getting into it. But after those first few minutes, I really enjoy it. But every day when I'm getting down, if I'm writing a book, writing my research or anything like that, it always takes just a few minutes getting into it. And once I kind of get over that hump, I'm right into it. And I think we find that with a lot of our students too, just because it's a hard exercise to get into. We're really working our brain, just like if we're doing physical exercise, the first few minutes are the hardest time to get into it. So I like that. I really like that story. Dr. Ray, can you remind us what that quote is? We have Margot that is asking about that quote. She wants to find it.
The one I read earlier.
Yeah. May the work we do.
May the work we do. Let me put it in the chat room.
Okay. And in the meantime, we have unmuted Maureen, who has a question. Maureen, you should be able to unmute yourself now. There you go. We got you to work. All right.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. You're kind of garbly, but staticky, but let's see if we can hear you. I don't think.
Okay, I had one question which requires an advice. A student, and for now we have 1 week to the examination, but teachers still provide us with a lot of notes to write within our weekends, like Saturday and Sunday.
I think, Maureen, it's a little bit too hard to understand. If you want to type in your question into the chat, that would be great. Anyone else has questions? You can raise your hand or put a comment or question right in the chat.
And I put the quotation in the chat room.
I like it. May the work we do make the world we live in a little more worthy of our children. Very powerful. And very applicable too in many of the places where we're working and the students that we're trying to help and support. Well, Dr. Ray, I think that wraps everything up. I'm going to
wonderful. And let's not forget the October workshop. I'm really excited about that one for myself. I want to tell you that Dr. Bob Sanchez, who will be doing the workshop, let me tell you, this is one of the most outstanding people I've ever met. He knows leadership. I could go on. We'll talk about it next month.
Yeah. All right. Well, everyone have a great month. If there's anything that we can do as Ray Global, please let us know.